Some things aren't lost. They're just waiting for the right soul to listen. The night had settled deep over the outskirts of Ashford County, the kind of quiet that felt almost deliberate, as if the land itself was holding its breath. A cold wind drifted through the charred remains of an old grove just beyond the gravel road, carrying with it the faint scent of burnt wood and damp earth. Daniel Mercer stood beside his pickup, hands tucked into the worn pockets of his canvas jacket, eyes scanning the dark silhouette of trees that had never quite grown back the same after the fire years ago. At his side, Scout moved differently tonight. The 6-year-old German shepherd, usually calm and measured, had gone still, completely still, his ears pricked forward, body rigid as if tuned to a frequency Daniel couldn't hear. "What is it, boy?" Daniel murmured, his voice low, careful not to disturb whatever fragile tension hung in the air. Scout didn't respond the way he normally would. No glance back, no wag of the tail, just a slow, deliberate step forward toward a blackened tree stump near the edge of the clearing. The wood there was cracked and hollow, its surface scarred by time and weather, but something about it seemed to pull the dog in. Scout let out a soft, almost uncertain whine, rare for him, then began to dig. Not frantic, not wild. Purposeful. Each movement measured, controlled, as if he knew exactly where to place his paws. Daniel frowned, shifting his weight as gravel crunched beneath his boots. "Easy," he said quietly, though the word felt misplaced. Because there was nothing easy about the way Scout was acting. He had seen this before, years back, in places far from home. Moments when the dog sensed something buried deeper than sight or sound could explain. Daniel stepped closer, kneeling beside the dog, the cold seeping through the denim at his knees. "You found something, didn't you?" he whispered. Scout paused for a second, just long enough to glance at him, amber eyes reflecting the faint glow of the truck's headlights. Then he returned to digging, faster now, urgency creeping into his movements. The soil gave way easier than expected, soft beneath the surface despite the hardened ground above. Within minutes, Scout's paw struck something solid. A dull, hollow thud that didn't belong to roots or stone. Daniel's breath caught slightly. He brushed away dirt with his hands, fingers moving carefully, uncovering the edges of something square. Wood. Old wood. Weathered, darkened by years underground. A box. Small enough to carry, but heavy enough to matter. Daniel hesitated. His hands hovered just above it, as if touching it might trigger something he wasn't ready to face. Scout stepped back slowly, watching him now, his earlier urgency replaced by a quiet, steady gaze, as if his job had been done. The wind shifted then, colder, slipping through the broken trees with a low whisper that seemed to circle them both. Daniel swallowed, his jaw tightening as he brushed the last layer of dirt away. Faint markings appeared along the lid. Worn, scratched, but unmistakable. His expression changed. Not fear. Not exactly. Something deeper. Recognition. He sat back slightly, exhaling through his nose, eyes fixed on the box like it had reached up from the past just to find him. "No," he murmured under his breath, though there was no one there to hear it but the dog. Scout remained still, watching, waiting, because whatever lay inside that box, it wasn't just buried in the ground. It had been buried in Daniel Mercer for a long, long time. Daniel did not touch the box right away. The cold from the ground had already crept into his hands, but it was not the temperature that made his fingers hesitate. It was the markings. Faint, worn almost to nothing, yet still carrying the shape of something he had not seen in years but could never forget. He leaned closer, brushing a bit more dirt away with the side of his thumb, careful, almost respectful. The symbol came into view slowly, like a memory rising through fog. A simple outline, scratched by hand, uneven but deliberate. The same marking his unit used to leave behind when something had to be hidden, not lost. Daniel exhaled slowly, his breath drifting into the night air like smoke. "That is not possible," he said under his breath, though there was no conviction in it. Scout shifted his weight slightly, the soft crunch of soil beneath his paws breaking the silence. The dog's eyes never left Daniel, steady and calm now, as if whatever urgency had driven him here had already passed. Daniel sat back on his heels, running one hand over the back of his neck. For a long moment, he said nothing. The wind moved again, threading through the hollow trunks, carrying a low, almost whispering sound that made the clearing feel older than it was. He looked at the box again, then away, then back once more. "We buried everything," he murmured, more to himself than to the dog. "Or at least we thought we did." Scout let out a soft breath, not quite a sigh, and stepped closer, lowering his head slightly, as if urging him forward without pressure. Daniel noticed it. He always did. That quiet way the dog had of guiding without forcing, of waiting instead of pulling. It had saved them more than once. "All right," Daniel said quietly, his voice steadier now, though something beneath it had shifted. He reached forward and placed both hands on the sides of the box. The wood was rough, splintered in places, but still solid. Stronger than it looked. Carefully, he lifted it free from the earth, bits of dirt falling away as it rose into the dim light. It was heavier than he expected, not by much, but enough to matter. Enough to suggest that whatever was inside was not empty and not forgotten. He turned it slightly, examining the edges. There were no hinges visible, no obvious latch, just a seam along the top where the lid met the base. Simple. Intentional. The kind of design meant to keep things closed until the right moment. Daniel swallowed again, his jaw tightening. "You should not be here," he said softly, though it was unclear whether he meant the box, the memory, or himself. Scout moved around him in a slow half-circle, then sat, positioning himself just within arm's reach. Close enough to be there. Far enough to give space. Daniel let out a quiet breath and rested the box on his knees. His hands hovered over the lid, not touching, just feeling the space between. For a second, his eyes closed. Not in fear. In recognition. Because somewhere deep inside, he already knew this was not an accident. This was not something lost and stumbled upon. This was something placed. Something meant to be found. And not by just anyone. The wind stilled for a brief moment, as if the world itself had paused to watch what he would do next. Daniel opened his eyes again, slower this time, and lowered his hands onto the lid. His fingers pressed gently against the wood, tracing the edge where it would open. He did not lift it yet. Not yet. Because whatever waited inside was not just going to change what he knew. It was going to change what he believed had ended a long time ago. The moment stretched longer than it should have, as if time itself had decided to slow down just enough to make Daniel feel every second of it. His fingers rested on the lid, unmoving, while the quiet around him deepened into something almost sacred. Then, with a breath he did not realize he had been holding, he lifted. The wood gave way with a soft, dry sound, the faint creak of something that had waited years to be opened again. Inside, there was no flash of gold, no sudden reveal of anything grand. Just a neatly folded piece of cloth, faded and worn, resting on top of something heavier beneath. Daniel blinked, his brow tightening slightly as he reached in and lifted the cloth. It was an old unit patch, edges frayed, the colors dulled by time, but still unmistakable. His hand froze midair. "No," he whispered, quieter this time, not in disbelief, but in something closer to understanding. Scout leaned forward slightly, his nose twitching as if even he could sense the shift in the air. Beneath the patch lay a sealed envelope, thick paper, yellowed at the edges, with a name written across the front in careful, steady handwriting. Daniel Mercer. He stared at it, his chest rising and falling a little slower now. That handwriting. He knew it, not from memory alone, but from the way it carried a certain weight, a certain patience. The kind of writing done by someone who thought before every word. His hand moved almost on its own, fingers closing gently around the envelope. It felt heavier than paper should feel, not physically, but in a way that settled somewhere deeper. He turned it over. The seal had never been broken, not even touched, which meant one thing. It had never reached him. The wind stirred again, softer this time, brushing through the clearing like a quiet voice passing by. Daniel sat there, the open box resting against his knees, the envelope in his hands, and for the first time since he had found it, he did not look away. Scout shifted closer, pressing lightly against his side, grounding him in the present while everything else began to pull him backward. "You kept this from me," Daniel said under his breath, though there was no anger in it. Only a quiet kind of ache that had no sharp edges, just depth. He slid his thumb beneath the edge of the seal and paused again, his hand stopping just short of breaking it. Not because he was afraid of what it might say, but because he already knew it would change something. And once changed, it would not return. Scout let out a soft breath, resting his head gently against Daniel's arm, the simple weight of it enough to steady him. Daniel glanced down at the dog, and for a brief moment, the tension in his expression softened. "You knew," he murmured. "You always know." The dog did not move, but his presence was answer enough. Daniel looked back at the envelope, then finally, slowly, broke the seal. The paper opened with a faint tear, the sound small but final. Inside was a single folded letter. He pulled it free carefully, unfolding it with the same deliberate motion he had used to lift the box from the earth. The handwriting was the same. Steady. Familiar. Real. His eyes scanned the first line, and whatever breath he had left seemed to leave him all at once. Not in shock, not in fear, but in recognition of a truth that had been waiting longer than he had realized. The words were simple. "If you are reading this, it means Scout found you." Daniel read the line again, slower this time, as if the meaning might change if he gave it enough space to breathe. It did not. The words remained exactly as they were, simple and impossible to ignore. "If you are reading this, it means Scout found you." His eyes lowered instinctively to the dog beside him, who had not moved, his steady presence, now carrying a weight that felt different than before. Not just a companion, not just a partner, something more deliberate, something chosen. Daniel's fingers tightened slightly around the letter as he continued reading, the paper faintly trembling in his hands despite the stillness of the night. The next lines were written with the same calm precision, each word placed carefully, as if the writer had known exactly how much time there would be to say everything that mattered. "I did not know if you would ever come back here, but I knew if you did, he would be the one to bring you." Daniel's jaw set, a quiet tension building beneath the surface as pieces began to shift into place. He glanced again at Scout, searching his face as if the dog might offer an explanation, but Scout only blinked slowly, his gaze unwavering, as though he had always known this moment would come. Daniel swallowed, returning to the letter. "There are things we could not say back then, not because they did not matter, but because we thought there would be more time. There is never as much time as we think." The wind moved softly through the clearing, brushing against Daniel's jacket, carrying a chill that felt less like cold and more like memory. His eyes followed the words down the page, each sentence pulling him deeper into something he had tried for years to leave behind. "What happened that day was not your fault. You were never meant to carry it alone." Daniel stopped reading. His hand lowered slightly, the letter hovering just above his knee as his gaze drifted somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the night itself. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with something that had been waiting. Scout shifted closer again, pressing lightly against his leg, grounding him in the present. Daniel let out a slow breath, the kind that did not release everything, but enough to keep going. He lifted the letter once more. "I left something else for you. Not here. This was only meant to guide you. There is a place you need to see, a place we never finished. You will understand when you get there." Daniel's brow furrowed slightly, his focus sharpening as the tone of the letter shifted from reflection to direction. Beneath the final lines, there was a small set of coordinates, written carefully, unmistakably intentional. Numbers that pointed somewhere real, somewhere waiting. His thumb traced over them slowly, committing them to memory before he even realized he was doing it. He looked up, scanning the dark outline of the land around him, as if expecting the answer to reveal itself immediately. It did not. But something had already changed. The past no longer felt like something behind him. It felt like something calling him forward. Daniel folded the letter carefully, more carefully than necessary, and placed it back inside the box. He did not close the lid. Not yet. Scout stood then, calm and ready, his posture steady, his eyes lifting toward the distant tree line as if he could already see where those coordinates would lead. Daniel followed his gaze, the faintest shift of resolve settling into his expression. "All right," he said quietly, not to the dog, not to the night, but to something deeper than both. And for the first time in a long time, the path ahead did not feel uncertain. It felt inevitable. Daniel did not rush. That was the first thing that changed. In the past, he would have packed up fast, moved on instinct, followed orders even when they did not make sense. But tonight was different. Tonight, there was no command but the quiet pull of something unfinished. He closed the box gently, brushing the remaining dirt from its surface before placing it carefully in the back seat of his truck. The door shut with a soft, final sound that seemed to echo more than it should have. Scout circled once before jumping in beside it, settling down without being told, his eyes still alert but calm, as if he understood that the next part of the journey had already begun. Daniel climbed into the driver's seat, his hands resting on the wheel for a moment before turning the key. The engine came to life with a low rumble, steady and familiar, grounding him in something real as the rest of the night stretched ahead. He pulled the folded letter from his jacket pocket again, glancing down at the coordinates. Numbers and direction. Precise. Intentional. He reached for his phone, entering them slowly, double-checking each digit as if any mistake might take him somewhere he was not meant to go. The map loaded after a moment, the small blue line tracing a path that led away from town, deeper into land he had not visited in years. His jaw tightened slightly as he recognized the direction. "You have got to be kidding me," he murmured under his breath. Scout lifted his head at the sound of his voice, ears tilting slightly, watching him through the reflection in the rearview mirror. Daniel let out a quiet breath, somewhere between disbelief and reluctant acceptance. "Of course it is there," he added, softer now. Because of all the places those coordinates could have pointed to, they led back to one location he had spent years avoiding. Not out of fear. Not exactly. But because some places hold more than memory. They hold weight. He shifted the truck into gear and eased onto the narrow dirt road, headlights cutting through the darkness in long, pale beams. The trees closed in as he drove, tall and silent, their branches weaving together overhead like a ceiling that had no end. The gravel gave way to packed earth, then to a thinner path barely marked by time. The kind of road that does not invite visitors, but remembers those who have been there before. Scout sat upright now, his posture changing again, alert but not tense, his eyes fixed forward as if he could see beyond the reach of the headlights. Daniel noticed it and said nothing. He did not need to. The dog's instincts had already proven themselves more than once tonight. The miles passed slowly, each one pulling him further from the present and closer to something buried beneath years of silence. The trees thinned eventually, opening into a wide stretch of land where the sky felt larger, colder, untouched. Daniel slowed the truck as a familiar outline came into view in the distance. A structure, barely standing, its frame worn by time but still recognizable. He stopped the truck a few yards away, the engine idling softly as he stared ahead. "We never finished it," he said quietly, the words slipping out before he could. "Stop them." Scout did not move right away. Then, slowly, he stepped down from the truck, landing lightly on the ground and turning to look back at Daniel, not impatient, not urging, just waiting. Daniel stepped out after him, the cold air sharper here, carrying the faint scent of old wood and open earth. He stood still for a moment, taking in the place as it was now compared to how it had been then. Time had changed it, but not enough to erase what mattered. Scout began walking forward, not fast, not slow, just certain. And after a brief pause, Daniel followed, each step bringing him closer to the place he had once left behind, and the truth that had been waiting there ever since. The structure stood quieter than Daniel remembered, as if time itself had learned to move around it instead of through it. The old frame rose from the ground with a stubborn kind of dignity, weathered boards leaning slightly, the roofline uneven but still holding. Years ago, it had been something else entirely. Not abandoned, not forgotten. A beginning. Scout moved ahead, his steps measured, nose low to the ground as he traced a path that did not exist to anyone else. Daniel followed a few paces behind, his boots pressing softly into the dry earth, each step stirring faint echoes of memory that did not come all at once, but in fragments. A laugh carried on the wind, a voice calling out measurements. The steady rhythm of work that once filled this place with purpose. He slowed as he reached the edge of the structure, his hand lifting instinctively to brush against one of the wooden beams. The surface was rough beneath his fingers, splintered in places, but still solid. Stronger than it looked. "We said we would finish it," he murmured quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. The night offered no reply, only the soft whisper of wind moving through the open spaces where walls had never been completed. Scout paused near the center of what used to be the main room, his body going still again, That same stillness from before, focused and deliberate. Daniel recognized it immediately. "You found something," he said, his voice low but certain this time. Scout did not bark. He did not move. He simply stood there, looking down at a spot where the ground looked no different than anywhere else. But Daniel knew better now. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied the earth. There was no obvious marking, no sign of disturbance, just a quiet patch of soil that seemed to hold its breath. He crouched slowly, the familiar weight of the moment settling over him again, though this time it felt less like resistance and more like understanding. "All right," he said softly, almost to the ground itself. His hands moved carefully, brushing away the top layer of dirt. The soil here was firmer than before, packed down over time, but not untouched. Not completely. Scout shifted his weight slightly, watching with that same steady gaze, present but patient. Minutes passed in silence as Daniel worked, his movements steady, methodical, the way they had always been when something mattered. Then his fingers struck something. Not wood this time. Metal. A faint, hollow sound that carried through the stillness with quiet certainty. Daniel paused, his breath catching just slightly as he cleared more dirt away. A small metal hatch revealed itself beneath the surface, rectangular, worn, but intact. The edges were lined with rust, but the handle in the center remained solid, as if it had been waiting. Daniel sat back for a moment, his eyes fixed on it, the pieces falling into place in a way that felt both unexpected and inevitable. "You did not leave me a memory," he said under his breath, his voice steadier now. "You left me a path." Scout stepped closer, his shoulder brushing lightly against Daniel's arm, grounding him once again. Daniel reached forward, his hand closing around the metal handle. It was cold to the touch, colder than the night air, carrying a weight that felt older than time itself. He did not pull it open right away. Instead, he looked around the unfinished structure, taking in the quiet, the stillness, the sense that this place had not been abandoned at all. It had simply been waiting. And now, for the first time, Daniel was ready to see what had been left behind. Daniel tightened his grip around the metal handle, the cold seeping into his palm as if it carried something more than temperature. For a brief moment, he closed his eyes, not to escape the moment, but to meet it fully. Then, slowly he pulled. The hatch resisted at first, the faint scrape of metal against earth breaking the silence as it gave way inch by inch. The sound echoed softly through the unfinished structure, a quiet announcement that something long hidden was finally being seen again. When the hatch lifted open, a breath of air rose from below, cool and still, untouched by the passing years above. Daniel leaned forward slightly, peering into the darkness beneath. It was not empty. A narrow set of steps descended into a small underground space, the edges lined with reinforced boards, carefully constructed, not improvised. Intentional. Scout moved closer, his ears forward, his body alert but not tense, as if he recognized the place not as a threat, but as a destination. Daniel let out a slow breath, his eyes adjusting as he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing more of what lay below. It was not large, perhaps no more than 10 feet across, but it had been built with care. Shelves lined the walls, simple but sturdy, holding objects that had been preserved far better than time should have allowed. Boxes, tools, and something else, something placed at the center. Daniel climbed down slowly, each step deliberate, the wood beneath his boots holding firm despite the years. Scout followed without hesitation, his movement silent, his presence steady behind him. When Daniel reached the bottom, he paused, the beam of light sweeping across the space. It did not feel abandoned. It felt kept, as if someone had prepared it not to be forgotten, but to be returned to. His gaze settled on the center of the room. A small wooden table stood there, untouched, and on it rested a second box. This one was different from the first. Cleaner, less worn, protected. Daniel stepped closer, his breath quieter now, his movements guided by something deeper than curiosity. The box was made of polished wood, its surface smooth, its edges precise. On the lid, carved carefully into the grain, was the same marking he had seen before. Only this time, it was clear, intentional, not faded by time. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the carving, tracing its lines slowly as if confirming that it was real. You planned all of this, he murmured, the realization settling into his voice. Not anger, not confusion, something closer to respect. Scout sat beside him, his posture calm, his gaze fixed not on the box, but on Daniel himself, as if this moment belonged more to the man than the object before him. Daniel exhaled quietly and opened the box. Inside, there was no clutter, no scattered objects. Everything was placed with care. A folded flag, neatly kept. A photograph, edges slightly worn but still intact. And beneath them, a sealed document. Daniel's hand hovered for a moment before lifting the photograph first. He brought it closer to the light, his eyes focusing slowly. It was a picture of two men standing beside this very structure, though it had been whole then. The frame complete, the roof intact. One of them was Daniel, younger, unburdened. The other, his expression softened, the weight behind his eyes shifting into something deeper. Recognition, memory, the kind that does not fade, only waits. He lowered the photograph slightly, his breath unsteady now, though not from fear. From something that had been locked away for too long. Beneath it, the folded flag remained untouched, its presence quiet but undeniable. And the document beneath it, still sealed, waited patiently, as if it knew it would only be opened when Daniel was finally ready to understand what had been left for him all along. Daniel held the photograph a moment longer, his thumb resting lightly against its worn edge as if he could feel the past through the paper itself. The version of him in the image looked almost unfamiliar now, standing beside a man whose presence once filled every quiet space with certainty. They had built this place together, not just with tools and measurements, but with something deeper, something unspoken that only existed between those who had walked through the same storms. He lowered the photograph carefully, placing it back exactly where it had rested, then reached for the folded flag. His hands slowed as they touched the fabric, reverent without needing to think about it. The material was preserved with care, each fold precise, untouched by time, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. Daniel did not unfold it. He did not need to. He already understood what it represented, not as a symbol, but as a promise carried quietly across years that had never truly let go of him. He set it gently aside, his focus shifting to the final item in the box. The sealed document. It was thicker than the letter from before, official in a way that felt grounded, deliberate. His name was written across the front again, but this time in a different hand. Cleaner, more formal. He turned it over, noticing the seal still intact, unbroken since the day it had been placed here. Scout moved slightly closer, his presence steady, his breathing slow and calm, as if he already knew what this final piece would bring. Daniel exhaled and broke the seal. The paper inside unfolded with a quiet firmness, revealing pages filled with structured text, signatures, and something that made his brow tighten in disbelief. It was not just a message. It was a transfer. Ownership. The land, the structure above, and everything beneath it had been legally placed in his name. Daniel stared at the page, reading it once, then again, the meaning settling in slowly but unmistakably. This had not been left behind by accident. This had been prepared, planned, completed long before he ever returned. His grip on the paper loosened slightly as his eyes moved to the final section, where a handwritten note had been added beneath the official text. Different from the letter, but carrying the same quiet voice. You always said this place deserved to be finished. I could not do it alone, so I made sure it would still be yours when you were ready. Daniel's breath caught, not sharply, but in a way that seemed to settle deeper into his chest. He looked around the underground space again, at the shelves, the careful arrangement, the intention behind every detail. Nothing here had been left unfinished. It had simply been waiting for him. Scout shifted beside him, pressing lightly against his leg, grounding him once again in the present as everything else aligned into something clear. Daniel folded the document slowly, his movements steady now, no hesitation left in them. He placed it back into the box, alongside the flag and the photograph, his hand resting there for a moment longer than necessary. You did not leave me a burden, he said quietly, his voice carrying a calm that had not been there before. You left me a way forward. The words settled into the space around him, not as an ending, but as something beginning to take shape. Above them, the unfinished structure stood silent beneath the open sky, no longer just a memory of what had been left behind, but a foundation waiting to be completed. And for the first time in years, Daniel did not feel like he was standing in the past. He felt like he had finally arrived where he was meant to be. Daniel did not rush to leave. That, more than anything else, told him something inside had changed. He remained there in the quiet underground space a while longer, not searching, not questioning, just allowing the weight of it all to settle into something steady. Scout lay down beside him, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but aware, as if the dog understood that this moment was not about movement, but arrival. Eventually, Daniel rose, lifting the box carefully and holding it close for a brief second before setting it back in its place on the table. Not to leave it behind, but to honor it where it belonged. He turned toward the steps, his movements calm, grounded, and began to climb back up into the night. The air above felt different now. Still cold, still quiet, but no longer heavy. The unfinished structure stood beneath the open sky, its silhouette no longer a reminder of what had been abandoned, but a frame waiting to be completed. Daniel stepped out into the clearing and paused, his gaze moving across the beams, the open spaces, the lines that once marked a plan that had never been finished. Until now, Scout emerged beside him, shaking off a bit of dust before standing still, looking up at Daniel with that same steady gaze that had led him. Here in the first place. You brought me back, Daniel said quietly, his voice carrying something close to gratitude. Scout's tail moved once, slow and certain, before he turned his head toward the structure as if to say the rest was up to him. Daniel let out a soft breath and walked forward, his boots pressing firmly into the ground as he stepped into the center of the frame. He looked up at the open sky above where a roof should have been, the stars faint but present, scattered across the darkness like something patient and enduring. His hand lifted, resting against one of the beams again, but this time there was no hesitation, no distance, only presence. He could almost hear it again, the rhythm of work, the quiet conversations, the sense that this place had once been more than wood and nails. And now, it would be again. Morning came slowly, the first light breaking across the horizon in soft shades of gold and pale blue. Daniel had not left. He had stayed through the night, sitting against one of the beams, Scout beside him, both of them watching as the darkness gave way to something new. When the sun finally rose, it did not feel like a beginning or an ending. It felt like continuation. Daniel stood, stretching slightly, his eyes scanning the land with a clarity he had not felt in years. The past was still there. It always would be, but it no longer held him in place. It had pointed him forward. Scout stepped ahead, moving through the structure with quiet confidence, his path no longer searching, but familiar. Daniel followed without hesitation. There was work to do, not because he had to, but because he finally understood why it mattered. He paused once more at the center, looking around, taking it in fully. Then he nodded, almost to himself. "We will finish it," he said softly. The words did not echo. They settled. Because some promises are not broken by time. They are simply carried, waiting for the moment when someone is ready to fulfill them. And as the light grew stronger, filling the space that had once been left incomplete, Daniel no longer felt like a man returning to something lost. He felt like someone who had finally found what had been waiting for him all along. Because sometimes, the things we think we buried are not gone. They are planted, waiting for the right moment to grow into something that can guide us home.